Greetings to all of you and welcome to session 51 on the Gospel of John. I'm Pastor Timothy Muse, lead pastor here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Alliance, Ohio. It's a joy to be with you today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your time, your journey, your education, your growth, your spirituality. Time is our greatest commodity, and the fact that you're investing it in this over all the other things you could be investing your time in, not only am I thankful from a personal and professional standpoint, but I do believe that God is also thankful that you are willing and desiring to spend time and invest in the work that God has us doing together. So thank you for that. Thank you for your willingness to be part of this. Thank you for your willingness to be part of the work that we have had set out before us. I pray that this time is powerful and beneficial. If this is your first time with us, then welcome to the series. I certainly would encourage you to carry on and continue the process, continue the session here today. I think you'll get a lot out of it. But I would also encourage you to go back and listen to some of the previous episodes. We've been going on this for now over a year, and so we have a lot of good content, a lot of good stuff about the Gospel of John back there. So give a listen, give some time. If you're rejoining us again, thanks for coming back. Thanks for being part of the work that we're doing together. It's awesome. It's really great to come and collaborate in this growth and this opportunity. So thanks for being part of it. Thanks for investing in it. Thanks for sharing your time. However you connected with this, if you would, share it out there. If you connected through the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, then please share it out there, retweet it, like it, whatever platform you're working on, so that others can see it, so that others can experience and grow and get what we get, this word of God, this connection. So I definitely encourage that. And if you're, and it's all going to be kicked to my YouTube channel because that's where this is posted. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us. So in subscribing to the YouTube channel, then all of the stuff that comes up on YouTube, any new information, you'll immediately get notification on. But then you can also share this with other people and get other people involved in it. So that's really what we're about. I mean, it's twofold. One, we're looking to grow our own spiritual journey, grow our own faith perspective, but we're also looking to share this out there with others so that others can experience it too, so that others can grow in their faith and grow in their experience and their expression. So I definitely would encourage you to share it out there. I definitely would encourage you to get it out there and get people involved and get people connected. So thank you for that. Thank you for your willingness to be part of what we're doing here and your willingness to continue on in this journey. As always, I definitely encourage you to have a Bible open before you. And follow along if you can. I mean, if you're listening to this and doing something else, driving or gardening or working out, then I get it. And that's awesome. And thanks for tuning in. But if you can, have a Bible open before you so that you can follow along, so you can get the information and you can read the words. One of the things I've always said is that I think we think we know what the Bible says in a lot of circumstances, but it's when we really open up the Bible, when we read it, when we get into it, that the Bible really reveals itself to us. Really reveals this living document to us, this powerful and passionate Word of God that continues to speak to us new every day. Yeah, the words are the same, and the words of the Gospel of John that we're reading now are the same that were read in the 70s, in the 50s, back in the 1800s, of course. The words are the same, but we're different people. We're different now than we were even yesterday. Think of where your life is today based on versus where you were last week when you heard the last session or the last episode. What's happened? How have you changed that then has brought about a change in your identity for the sake of the word. So that's where we're at. That's how this works. It works by growth. It works by we get into the Word and the Word changes us. It shapes us. And that's the joy of studying the Bible. That's the power of studying the Bible on a daily basis, on a rigorous and disciplined basis. So it's very cool to have you participating. It's very cool to be part of this. Thank you for that. Thank you for your willingness, and thank you for your time as we go deeper into the Gospel of John. And we really have been spending a lot of time we've really been spending a lot of time in this book, and we're over a year now, and we still have quite a ways to go yet before we're done. But it's really important, and it makes sense. It's definitely worth the investment in that there's so much depth and so much meaning and so much spirit that comes from this book, from this expression of the gospel. So that's where we are. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. We're in chapter 18, so we're in the kind of the final piece of the book. We're in what's called the Passion section. So we're right in the middle of the trial, right in the middle of the time Jesus faces with Pilate and getting ready for his crucifixion. So that's where we are. It's early on Friday, which we would know as Good Friday. And that's where we pick up. So we're in chapter 18, and we're going to pick up on verse number 33. So this is verse number 33 and following. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus asked, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king of the Jews? So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" Okay, so as we go on, remember now last week when we connected, they took Jesus from Caiaphas, who was the high priest, and they led him off to Pilate. And they put Jesus into the headquarters of Pilate, into the Roman, the secular government. And this is a really important distinction, kind of an important handover, because up to that point, up to the point when Jesus was still in the hands of Pilate, or of Caiaphas and Annas, this was still a sacred issue. This was a spiritual issue, and Jesus was going to battle spiritually. Well, things have changed now. Now that Pilate is involved, now that the Romans are involved, this is no longer a spiritual thing. This is a secular thing. This is a law thing. This is a Jesus facing down the lawyers and facing down the secular government thing. Now that it's in the hands of the Romans, everything changes. It moves from sacred to secular. It moves from a God thing to a law thing. And that's where we are. Jesus is now in the hands of Pilate. So really it's up to Pilate. The Pharisees and the scribes, the chief priests, they're kind of out of it now. They've brought in the secular authority, and so now it's up to the secular authority to deal with what's going on here, and that's what happens. So Pilate goes out because the Jews didn't want to come into the headquarters, because if they did, they would have been defiled. And remember, this is Passover. Passover is about ready to begin. So they didn't want to be defiled. Even if you go through a ritual cleansing, there's a wait time. You can't just, and this is kind of part of how the sacrificial system works. If you sinned, if you were unclean, then you had to wait. Even if you went through the cleanliness process, you had to wait. You couldn't just like go in the morning and be unclean and then get washed and be clean in the afternoon. There was a wait time. So the Jews were very, very particular. They were very careful not to find themselves in unclean land, especially right around the Passover. So they didn't want to go in. They didn't want to go into Pilate's headquarters. So Pilate went out to them and asked them what was going on, and he wanted to know the charge. Remember this last week, and they didn't give a charge. They just said he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. If he wasn't a bad guy, we wouldn't have brought him to you. That's what they say. If he wasn't a bad guy, we wouldn't have brought him to you. He's a bad guy. So it's a bad guy. So get rid of him. Get rid of him. Execute him. Kill him. We can't kill him, which, again, like I talked about last time, that's a bit of a misnomer. The Jews definitely have the capability of killing others, of executing in the name of the law, but they didn't want to do that to Jesus because they knew that Jesus was, well, innocent. That's the thing. They knew that this guy was innocent. They knew that this guy hadn't done anything wrong. They just didn't want to. They didn't want to be held accountable for his death. They didn't want to be held spiritually accountable for his death. And that's where we see this. That's where we're going with this, is that the Jews then turn it over to the Gentiles, to the Romans. They want to use the Romans as their weapon of execution. And that's what they're working to do. They're working to use the Romans as their weapon of execution. So Pilate comes back in to question Jesus. Now, Pilate, like I said last time, Pilate could have just killed this guy and moved on. Pilate doesn't care. Pilate doesn't care about any of this, all right? Pilate wants to keep the peace. Pilate wants to keep the peace. Pilate wants to, he wants to make sure that things don't break out. He wants to make sure that the Roman emperor really isn't paying attention. That's the key. The key is you never want your boss to really pay attention. You want to do your job, but you never want your boss to pay attention, because if your boss is paying attention, you're not doing a very good job. And that's it. So Pilate doesn't want Caesar to pay attention. Pilate wants peace. Pilate wants tranquility so that there is no tension, there's no issue. So Pilate could have just killed him. Pilate could have just wiped Jesus out. He could have just executed him and moved on. He didn't. He didn't because he knew what was going on here. He knew that the chief priests and the scribes were acting differently. Okay? Pilate doesn't care. He doesn't mind being brutal, but he's not going to be a puppet. He's not going to be anybody's puppet. So because he's not going to be anybody's puppet, he's not just going to kill people because the Jews tell him to. And that's the difference. Pilate wants to keep the peace, of course, but he's not just going to kill people because the Jews tell him to. Pilate's nobody's puppet, and so he's not going to act like a puppet in the eyes of the chief priests and the scribes. And since there's no clear accusation coming from the higher-ups in the Jewish quarter, Pilate comes back in to question Jesus about this, to really question. Now, I'm sure, obviously, there's been some talk, some idea, because Pilate comes back into the headquarters and says, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you the one coming to dethrone Herod?" Now, remember when I said before about how the Romans kept power. They would take over a land, but then they would put a king, or they would let the remaining king stay in place. Well, for someone to say I'm the king of the Jews, or I'm the king of anything, now they're bringing about a question of authority in the eyes of the Romans. And the Romans don't like that. The Romans don't like that. The Romans don't tolerate that very well. They don't tolerate when there is an unsanctioned change in leadership. And remember, this has nothing to do with God or spirit or temple. This has everything to do with power. So Pilate is asking Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Are you proclaimed? Obviously, Pilate's not going to recognize him as king of the Jews. Pilate's not going to recognize his rule. Pilate recognizes Herod. And as a matter of fact, if Jesus were to say, yes, I'm the king of the Jews, then there would be reason for execution. And Pilate's trying to get this guy to say what Pilate needs to hear in order to kill him and move on. But we all know one thing, that Jesus has to die. This is all set in motion. But the other thing is Jesus is too darn smart for this. Jesus is too smart to get caught up in some kind of linguistic trap that this brutal, leader is trying to bring him into. So, are you the king of the Jews? And what does Jesus answer? He doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He says, do you ask on your own, or did others tell you about me? So where are you getting your information from here, dude? Where are you getting your direction from? And really, quite frankly, Jesus is kind of calling him out as a puppet. Jesus is saying, hey, look, you're a puppet. Are you figuring this out yourself? Or are others telling you about me? Are you doing this because you're smart? Or are you doing this because you are bowing down to the whims of these power-hungry idiots in the name of God? What are you doing? So this is Jesus really kind of like stirring the pot even more. He is actually questioning Pilate's role as the leader of the region. So do you want me to be the king of the Jews? Is that what this question is here, Pilate? Or are you seeing me as king material, or did someone else witness to you about me? Where are you getting your information from, dude? Where are you getting your text from? Where are you getting your piece from? Because this will be important. This will be important about how you understand things. So, here's Jesus. I mean, he's really just kind of like plugging the pot. He's really saying, hey, he's poking it. He wants things to come to fruition. Remember what I said before? This has to happen. Jesus' execution has to happen. His crucifixion needs to come to be. And Jesus is willing to do this. He is willingly bringing this on. This is no mistake. This is no accident. This is no Jesus got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not what's happening here. No, Jesus is bringing this on. So he is poking the bear, if you will. He is poking at Pilate. And really kind of making fun of him. You know, are you smart enough to figure this out? Is that it? Are you figuring this? Do you ask this on your own? Are you smart enough to see who I am, Pilate? Or did others tell you about me? Are you the puppet to the puppet masters of the chief priests and the Pharisees? So what is his answer? I'm not a Jew, am I? Well, that's supposed to be a rhetorical question. You know what? And as I sit here, I'm not a Jew either. I never was. I was born into a Gentile household, baptized as a Gentile, and I've grown up as a Gentile. You don't have to be a Jew to recognize Jesus' kingship. And as a matter of fact, there are more non-Jews that recognize Jesus' kingship. And that's for another debate. But Jesus, Pilate's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not a Jew here, man. I mean, I'm still in charge, which is kind of a backpedaling. It's kind of a backpedaling of all of the things that Pilate could have said. This is kind of a backpedaling, trying to reestablish himself, realizing that he's looking down the face of someone who's far superior to him, both in stature and in dialogue and argumentative capabilities. Pilate very quickly realizes he is outgunned by Jesus. He is outmatched because of again, what is any non-guilty? What does any innocent person do in the face of persecution? They try to prove their innocence. What does a guilty person do in the face of persecution? They try to prove their innocence. What's Jesus doing? Jesus is pressing to do the one thing that all the Jews want, but Pilate doesn't want to do, and that's die. Jesus wants to be executed. That is what he is longing for. That is what he is working for. And he's pushing Pilate to do it. And Pilate, of all things, retorts pretty idiotically. I'm not a Jew, am I? Rather than saying, look, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. You can live, you can die. I don't care. I'm trying to save your skin, but you want to die? You can die. He said the chief priests and the scribes, man, they've handed you, your own nation has handed you over to me. What have you done? What have I done? What have you done? Again, here is Pilate trying to figure out a legitimate way to execute this guy or let him go, because the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes, they have not brought legitimate charge against Jesus. And actually, according to scriptures, they brought no charge against Jesus. They have brought no charges against him. They have not legitimized any reason for him to be standing in front of Pilate at all. So what they're bringing, they're just pressing Pilate to kill him, but they brought no charges. So he's asking, not necessarily from a look down, parent child, what have you done? But why are you here? What have you done? What has stirred up these people so much? So Pilate is now, he's no longer in a place of power. Pilate doesn't have to care. Pilate, I don't care what you've done. I'm going to kill you. But Pilate is no longer in a place of power. He is, I don't want to say he's in a place of somewhat of a respect for Jesus, because I don't think that's the case. However, I do think that Pilate does have some kind of awareness of the magnitude of the person standing before him. I think Pilate has some kind of awareness of who he's talking to and what is being brought to bear. So Pilate is like, look, what have you done? Why are you here? Your own nation, the chief priests, have handed you over to me. For them to come to me, for them to turn from sacred to secular, for them to come to me, that's a pretty significant thing. And so I have to ask, what have you done? Why are you here? Why have they turned their back on you? That's the question. And Pilate doesn't have an answer from the Jews, from the chief priests and the scribes. They just want him silenced, because really, quite frankly, even Pilate as secular authority, even Pilate as a brutal megalomaniac, if he were to hear what Jesus had done and why the Jews had turned him over, he would have been like, no, I'm not going to mess with this guy. you all are bananas. I'm not going to play with this guy. I mean, look at what he's capable of doing. No, that's not going to happen. So Pilate is completely oblivious, but he wants to know, what have you done? Why have they turned you over? Now, Jesus, in response to that, remember the question. The question is, are you the king of the Jews? All right. The Pilate is asking about kingship. And so Jesus says, my kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from this world. Okay, so very cryptic. Now, Jesus is definitely alluding to some kind of sovereignty, some kind of majesty, some kind of power. And the fact is, I mean, we refer to Jesus as King, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. That was what was sung about him at his birth. We sing it at Christmas. It's part of, I'm sure you're familiar with Handel's Great Messiah and that, and you probably can hear that in your head right now. So we refer to Jesus as king, but not a king of this world. He doesn't have an earthly throne. Remember, this is something very different. We understand people of power to sit at the top and dole out things to those below them. Jesus doesn't act that way. So he is saying, look, I have a kingdom, but it's not from around here. I have a kingdom, but you're not going to find it on any map. I have a kingdom, but it doesn't have earthly boundaries. If it did have earthly boundaries, then my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over. Come on, that's how it works. If you're following a king and the king gets taken or arrested, then the followers are going to fight to keep him back. Nobody is fighting to free Jesus. Nobody is fighting to get him back. So he stands alone in the midst of this trial. Because his kingdom is not of this world. Now, where is his kingdom of? His kingdom is of heaven, all right? And understand this to be true. If there was a war between heaven and the Romans to get Jesus freed, the Romans would stand about a tenth of a second worth of a chance, okay? I mean, Jesus, he's called down a myriad of angels. He called down the army of angels, and the army of angels would come through and just wipe everybody out. I mean, like in an instant. It would be gone. It'd be done. That'd be it. And Jesus would be victorious. Because his kingdom is not of flesh and blood. His kingdom is not of gravity and light and darkness. His kingdom is far more than that. And he brings far more than that into this kingdom. Now, we as humans included, even us struggle with the same kind of quandary that Pilate did in hearing Jesus talking about his kingdom not being of this world. Well, it's like, okay, well, then that's all there is this world. Again, and keep in mind, the Romans were very polytheistic. They believed in a lot of gods, but they really didn't have this kind of overarching unified afterlife. This was it. This was as good as you get. And the gods were those to be appeased, but once you appease them, they'd give you what you want, but that would be all. Here is Pilate working from a very empirical, very sense-based orientation. And Jesus says, look, I'm not of this world. My kingdom isn't of this world. My kingdom is far greater than this. If I were in this world, my followers would be fighting. They'd be fighting because that's what earthly kings do. Earthly kings get captured and earthly soldiers fight. That's how it works. But that's not the kingdom I come from. I don't come from this warrior-based, violence-based kingdom. I don't come from a kingdom that wins by defeating with might those who are less than. That's not how my kingdom works. And that's what's so confusing about this response to Pilate. Remember what I said about Roman peace. I mean, there was peace in the Roman Empire because everybody's so darned afraid of it. Violence and threats were the currency that kept the peace in the kingdom. But Jesus doesn't come from that kind of kingdom. Jesus comes from a very different kind of kingdom. Jesus comes from a kingdom of love and sacrifice, not a kingdom of hatred and fear. So the very nature of what Jesus brings to the table is the nature of love and grace. So when Jesus says, my kingdom's not of this world, because the kingdoms of this world battle. and they hurt and they break and they destroy. But that's not the kingdom of God, and that's not how God's kingdom works. And that's what's so confusing when Pilate is confronted with Jesus, because Pilate only knows violence. Pilate only knows anger, aggression, war, bloodshed. Pilate only knows getting something by defeating somebody else. Pilate doesn't know any better. He doesn't know any different. He is definitely entrenched in the world, the human sinfulness of violence and hatred. So Jesus says, my kingdom's not of this world. If it were, then I would, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jews, from being handed over to those who will use you as a weapon. Notice he didn't say being handed over to you. So again, this is another dig. This is another dig at Pilate and at Pilate's puppetry at the hands of the Jews. Jesus is discrediting Pilate's power. And really putting all of this in the hands of the Jews, saying this is all being orchestrated by the Jews, not you, buddy. You're a puppet. You're a hammer. I'm the nail, and the Jews are the board, all right? And they're using you to pound me. But this isn't about you. And I think, again, and this is where Pilate struggles, because he just can't keep up. He's just not capable of keeping up with Jesus. So Pilate asks him, so you are a king? Well, the inference is when Jesus talks about kingdom is that, he is the king, the leader. And we do see, like in Christ the King Sunday, we certainly do use language of Jesus being king. We acknowledge him and recognize him as king, as a king, as the king. Okay, so we do use that language even still today within the church. We refer to Jesus as king, but he never really refers to himself as king. He talks about his kingdom. He says, my kingdom is not of this world, but he never really says, I'm the king of my kingdom. Now, he does say, if it were, my followers would keep me from being handed over to the Jews. So we do get the inference that he's sitting at the top of the pyramid, but he never uses the word king. He doesn't refer to himself as king. He doesn't see a king as necessary within the hierarchy of heaven, within the hierarchy of the Trinity. Again, we very much see Pilate trying to turn something so mystical and heavenly and bigger into something so small and something so earthly and something so tiny thinking. So you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. You put that moniker on me. I don't take that moniker. You use that moniker again. And this is important because Jesus never proclaims himself as king. He might be the leader. He might be at the top of the group, but he never uses the word king. Okay, which again is really important because that's it's a very earthly word. King is a very earthly word. It creates a certain understanding. It creates a certain thought processes. When we think about king, we think about leaders, and I don't know. I mean, we just had a king coronated. We had a coronation here recently in England, which is the first time since many of us that have seen a coronation. But when we think about king, we think about an earthly ruler. We think about an earthly leader, a flawed earthly leader, mind you. I mean, any king is flawed because they're human. And they're going to make mistakes. Some kings are better than others, but they're all going to make mistakes. Every king is going to make a mistake sooner or later, and that's just the way it works. But when we're looking at this Jesus, we're not looking at this Jesus as an earthly king. That's why Jesus doesn't allow the moniker of king to be laid upon him. He wants something else. And he says, look, that's what you say that I am. You say that I am king. You say that I am a king. You say that I am the top dog. And look, here's the deal. As a top dog, as a king, no king would die for their people. The whole idea of a king dying for their people is preposterous. It needs to be the other way around. All of the people will die for the king. The king has the royal bloodline. The king carries all the important stuff. All the people will die for the king. But here's Jesus, and Jesus is going very differently because Jesus is saying, look, you say that I'm a king, But for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. To testify to the reality that God is one, supreme, that this is God's world. I don't care how big you think you are. I don't care how big the Roman emperor thinks he is. This is God's world. And as God's world, God has the say. That's the truth. And God's world, God's kingdoms works not through violence, not through punishment, but through sacrifice. That is the truth. The truth of the matter is the kingdom of God advances and grows through what? Say it with me, folks. Sacrifice. We're looking at the leader. We're looking at, for lack of a better terminology, the top dog. I mean, this is the Son in the Trinity, the Word made flesh, and he's not working with violence. He's not working with aggression. He's working with sacrifice. This is what I came into the world to do. I was sent into the world to die for the sake of the world. Now, that is not kingship. There is no king in all of history that's willing to die for the sake of their people. Now, don't get me wrong. Kings have died for the sake of their people, but they don't want to. They're not willing to. They don't see the value in it. They're usually pressed into it or have to. But here's Jesus saying, look, this is what I came into the world to do. This is the truth that I came to bring. The truth of God's power, the truth of God's existence, the truth of God's love, and the sacrifice that God makes and made and continues to make for the sake of all people. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Everyone who understands that the way of the world is sacrifice, that God's kingdom is moved through sacrifice, through willingness to submit, through willingness to grow. That is what the way of the world is. That is how it works out. That is the purpose, the point. God's way is sacrifice. Not, stay with me, not violence, not pain, but sacrifice. So that's what Jesus comes to bring. Now, again, this is so foreign to Pilate. Pilate's got no clue. Pilate's like, what? No leader sacrifices. The people sacrifice for the leader. The leader doesn't sacrifice for the people. But here is the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, the Word made flesh, showing that God actually does sacrifice for the people. That's how it works, because the people are worth it. And that's why Pilate and Jesus are talking like two different languages. And finally, Pilate's like, what's truth? Well, the truth is violence doesn't work. Aggression doesn't work. Pain doesn't work. War doesn't work. Weapons don't work. Fear doesn't work. You know, we can all be afraid for a while, but sooner or later we either overcome our fear or we dismantle it, one of the two. That's why I don't, as a preacher, propagate in fear and guilt, because fear and guilt, they're not sustainable. They might motivate for a moment, but they're not sustainable. They're not long-term life-changing. Fear and guilt don't change us. And the Romans used fear. They peddled it like a cheap wine. And that's how they continue to maintain the grip on their kingdom. However, the truth is, in God's world, in God's kingdom, fear and violence and aggression is not how it works. And that's what Jesus came to bring. That's what Jesus came to bring. After he had said this, okay, so we're going to go a little bit further. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and said, I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They shouted in reply, no, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a bandit. All right, so again, Pilate's a good politician. You know, he knows how to listen and how to placate to the people. And for the most part, there's nothing that any of these Jews, even banded together, is even going to begin to question or push against the Roman Empire. It's not going to happen. So there's really no threat. So Pilate works, you know, he understands the Passover. He understands this is a sacred time, even if it's not sacred for him. And this is what makes him an adequate leader, is he understands his people. He understands his people. He understands what his people are going through. So Pilate has this tradition. I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you this King of the Jews? Or do you want me to release Barabbas? Because I find no case against him. You're not giving me anything here. I see nothing about him that's wrong. So Pilate's very clear. He knows what is going on. He knows he knows that this is just ridiculousness and power hungriness, and he's trying to give everybody an out. Okay, he's trying to diffuse the situation, which is a good political leader. He's a good politician. Does he care about Jesus? No. Does he care about the Jews? No. Does he care about his own people? No. He cares about peace. He cares about keeping his power. And so he wants to make sure that Caesar pays no attention to him. Now, does Caesar care if he kills a local? No, he doesn't. Caesar doesn't care at all. Caesar, kill them all. I mean, for all he cares. As long as I get my taxes, that's all that matters. No, but what winds up happening here, and what the issue is if you start killing too many innocent people, that's when rebellions crop up. Okay? People don't necessarily have an issue with a guilty person being incarcerated, or, if you live in a capital punishment state, maybe even being executed. But people have a hard time when innocent people are being captive, are being arrested, especially innocent people who are doing good things. And Pilate sees that even though he doesn't believe in or care about this Jesus fellow is making a difference. And he's afraid that if he kills him, if he does something, he's going to rile up the people. He doesn't want to rile up the people. So he's given everybody an out. He's given everybody a good political out. Here it is. We're at this time. I always give you the chance to release somebody. How about I release for you this King of the Jews? How about we just call it a day? I don't have a case against him. You haven't given me anything against him. So let's just call it a day. Pilate's like, this is good. This could be good. We can all just walk away. We can all just be, we can all have our own thing. We can all save face. Everybody's happy. And if there's any question from Caesar, I can just say, this is a custom. The guy's a lunatic, kind of crazy loony. The Jews, they kind of lost the sense of themselves. And so we dealt with it. It's all good. We move on. But no. He's like, I find no case against him. I see no reason to do anything to him. So, I mean, I'm really not in a good place to, be your puppet. So, but you have a custom. I have a custom. You have a custom that I release for you someone at the Passover. Okay. So let's just call it a day. Let me just release this guy. You can take him back and, you can deal with him as you want. Let's just do this. That would be a good. But, they shouted in reply. Now, here's the fascinating thing. They shouted in reply, not this man, but Barabbas. Barabbas was a bandit. Barabbas was a thug. He was a rabble rouser. He was leading a rebellion. Okay. This is exactly the kind of person that the Romans don't want to release. This is exactly the kind of person that the Romans are afraid of. Internal strife, internal conflict. They're afraid of those who create a rebellion. Okay, so Barabbas was arrested because he was a rebel. And he's in prison because he's a rebel. He should be executed for treason and for political crimes. He shouldn't be even on the table. I mean, to rebel against the Roman Empire is a capital offense. So Jesus, what? I mean, this itinerant preacher who's making the chief priests and the Pharisees jealous, we want to kill him, but you want me to let go a rabble rouser, a rebellious, someone who's looking to, a usurper, someone who's looking to cause a problem within the empire. And so here is Pilate once again. Pilate is in a quandary because this is someone who definitely should be executed. This is definitely someone who should be killed. There's no doubt that Barabbas should be killed. There's no question. Barabbas should be executed, period. There is no reason to think for 1 minute that Barabbas deserves any kind of being freed at all. No. Barabbas should be executed. And yet, the crowd is calling for him while asking to execute Jesus, this preacher. Okay. And Pilate again is brought into question. He's brought in his circumstances brought into question. If he holds to executing Barabbas and releasing Jesus, then he risks a rebellion. He risks an uprising that could lose him his power. If he executes Jesus, he risks executing an innocent man, which, even though Rome is pretty darn brutal, they're not a real kin to executing innocent people. They don't want to get that kind of moniker, that kind of reputation. So he really does want to let Jesus go. He really does want Jesus to be gone and be out of there. He wants to resolve this, kill Barabbas, and sleep good at night. But now the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes, they're pushing the envelope in another direction. They want their own personal they want their own personal thing to be, their own personal grudge, their own personal circumstance to be dealt with, and they really don't care about Barabbas. I mean, they're not necessarily looking to have Barabbas released because they care about Barabbas. They don't care about Barabbas. They just don't want Jesus to be set free. They want Jesus to be executed. They want Jesus to be killed, because in his execution, that will put an end to any of this rebellion, any of this stuff, this ick that Jesus is bringing. And so it's not that they're looking to win Barabbas' freedom. It's not like they brought Jesus forward as the scapegoat so that Barabbas would be freed. They're actually using Barabbas as the scapegoat to condemn Jesus, and they're using Pilate as the hammer to do it. And Pilate knows this, but he really, in a lot of ways, is powerless to overcome it. He's powerless to do anything about it, which I think is the irony of the story, is that Pilate holds all the power. Pilate could just send Jesus off on his own and let the Jews kill him. Pilate has all the power. He's holding all the cards, but he's giving cards away versus playing the hand that's been dealt, that he knows he can play. And it's really a fascinating kind of procedural situation that we find ourselves in here, is that Pilate could very well, have ended this. But again, remember, this is all ordained. This has to happen. So Pilate's not going to, because God's not going to let him, but this is all part of the plan. This is all part of the dialogue. It's really fascinating. I look at this and I think one of the most fascinating things I see out of this is everybody who thinks they're in control is completely out of control. The only person that's in control here is Jesus. The only person who knows what's going to happen and is running the show is Jesus. Everybody else is just completely out of control. Pilate's fear and his incapability of making decisions is what is he's being controlled through. The chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes, their pride, their arrogance is what they're being controlled through. And the only one who's really in control of this whole situation is Jesus. Jesus is the one calling the shots. Jesus is the one running the show. Jesus is the one that's orchestrating how this is working out. And he's doing it quite well. One, because he's the Son of God, which is really, really important. But the other thing is this. Notice the one entity in this whole area that doesn't gain anything. That's Jesus. Jesus gets the cross, okay? Pilate's gaining power. He's fighting for his own gain. The Pharisees and scribes and chief priests and the nation are fighting their own gain. The only one who is sacrificing is Jesus, and he's the one in control. That ought to tell you something about the nature of sacrifice, is that when one enters into the nature of sacrifice, then one is in control, because there's nothing to protect. If you're willing to give it away, then there's nothing to protect. And if there's nothing to protect, then the nature of the situation changes drastically. So that's the fascinating thing. The fascinating thing is that Jesus is the one in control, and he is the one who's facing the sacrifice. He is the one who is in control, though he is the one who's giving up everything. Pilate and the Pharisees and the scribes and the chief priests, they're trying to either gain or maintain something, and they're the ones out of control, even though they think they're running the show. That's the fascinating thing about it. All right, my friends, I'm going to leave it here for now. I'm going to leave it at this point. We'll pick up here next week. Again, we're going to get into another bigger point, and I don't want to jump into something and not give it the due justice that it deserves. So I'm going to leave it here. As always, My contact information will come up at the end of the episode. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. I would love to be in dialogue, answer any questions, what have you. I'll either respond to you directly, or if need be, if I can, I'll put it into the next episode, because most of the time people are probably thinking the same thing you are. If you're asking a question, then others are probably asking that same question. So as always, thanks for tuning in. Please share this out there so that others get in contact with it, so that others experience it, and so that this ministry can grow. And once again, my friends, blessings to you, and we will talk to you next week.